John 10, 11 to 18. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I have received from my Father.
Our second reading is going to be from the book of Micah, and that can be found on page 935 in the Church Bibles. We're going to be reading Micah chapter 7, verses 8 to 17. Micah 7. Do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. Because I have sinned against him, I will bear the Lord's wrath until he pleads my case and upholds my cause. He will bring me out into the light. I will see his righteousness. Then my enemy will see it and will be covered with shame. She who said to me, "Where is the Lord your God?" My eyes will see her downfall. Even now she will be trampled underfoot, like mire in the streets. The day for building your walls will come, the day for extending your boundaries. In that day, people will come to you from Assyria and the cities of Egypt, even from Egypt to the Euphrates, and from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. The earth will become desolate because of its inhabitants, as a result of their deeds. Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance, which lives by itself in a forest, in fertile pasture lands. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead, as in days long ago. As in the days when you came out of Egypt, I will show them my wonders. Nations will see and be ashamed, deprived of all their power. They will put their hands over their mouths, and their ears will become deaf. They will lick dust like a snake, like creatures that crawl on the ground. They will come trembling out of their dens. They will turn to fear to the Lord our God, and will be afraid of you.
Well, please do keep your Bibles open at that page. It would be great if you could be checking them and keeping an eye on them while we look at them together. Micah chapter 7, verses 8 to 17. Now, it's been great to be baptizing Clara. Today, we have been welcoming her into the church family. We have heard some of the adults in her life express their faith in Jesus, and we've prayed that they would be able, and we as well, will be able to help her grow to know Jesus for herself and grow up in that faith. But some people might wonder, is that actually a really good thing for her to be buying into? Is she kind of joining the right team? She'll be in a minority. There'll be a lot of people in her life who aren't convinced about God or about Christianity. And how do we know that that is right? How can we see that what she's buying into really is good and really is true? Don't know whether everyone here would call themselves a Christian. And even those of us who would call ourselves Christians, there may well be those doubts and thoughts perhaps that we hear from others or that creep into our minds. How do we know any of this is real? And how do we know whether it's good? In other words, where is God when we don't see him. Because we look in the Bible and we read about these dramatic and supernatural things that people can see, but in our day-to-day lives today, most of us are not seeing that kind of thing all the time. We find ourselves having to put our faith in God even when we can't see what he's doing. Clara, I'm sure, won't be long before she's old enough to start asking questions. Perhaps some of us have children in our families who are asking questions. I remember an early question children often ask is, well, where is God? I can't see him. And the parents kind of explain, well, he's everywhere. Does that mean he's in this room? Does that mean he's in this little cup that I'm drinking from? Does that mean if I kind of put my bowl over it that I've caught God and that he's in there? It's a confusing idea, isn't it, for children? Where is God? And as we get older, we ask slightly more advanced questions along the same lines. Where is God? Why doesn't he make himself more obvious? Why does he allow us to go through the harder things that happen in our world and in our lives? And why can't we see what he's doing? Well, in the Bible reading that we had read to us, the second Bible reading just now, we had those words, where is the Lord your God? Micah chapter 7, verse 10. Where is the Lord your God? Other people were asking Israel that question. You see, at the time that Micah was writing, it was a time in history when God didn't look as if he was doing all that much. Maybe you've been given the idea that the Bible is non-stop drama and miracles and supernatural things, and yet actually you do see those things happening in the history of the Bible, but actually there's a lot of time in the Bible when you don't see those happening, as a way of preparing us for our lives today, when very often what God is doing may sometimes be behind the scenes and not right in front of you and obvious and visible. And the Bible prepares us for that. Micah speaks into a time when it didn't really look as if God was doing very much. The rough backstory to this is that Micah is preaching to a city called Jerusalem. Israel and Judah have been split into. Assyria is the big superpower of the day. They have all the armies and all the power, and they've swept through most of Israel. And they've defeated and conquered those places, taken people into captivity. Jerusalem is just about surviving, but only just about. It's surrounded by armies all around it. And people are saying, well, where's your God? Why hasn't your so-called God kept you safe from all of this? The Assyrians have totally different ideas about religion. They don't follow the God of Israel. So what is God doing? And in fact, what happens is that the Jerusalem gets mocked. They get scorned. They get laughed at and ridiculed. The field commander of the Assyrian army comes up to the gates and loudly shouts out what a load of rubbish they are and their God is and how they're defeated. And deliberately chooses to use their language rather than his own language because he really wants everyone in the city to overhear his mocking and his ridicule and to be demoralized by it. In a nutshell, Micah tells us what he's saying is, where is your God? Come and join us. We're the ones with the power. Don't be losers. Don't follow this fake God. And today's Bible reading is all about seeing. Let me just put some of it up on the screen and highlight there those words about seeing. I will see in verse 9. Verse 10, my enemy will see. Later on in verse 10, my eyes will see. Verse 15, I will show them. Verse 16, nations will see. God will make himself visible and apparent, says Micah. So where is God? We're going to look at Micah's answers. We're going to look at three answers that Micah gives to that question, three prophecies about that. The first one is that God is dealing with sin. Where is God when we don't see him? He's dealing with sin. So let me read to you again from chapter 7, verse 8. Remember, the city of Jerusalem is under attack. The enemies are mocking at the gates. If the city of Jerusalem could speak, this is what the city would say in verse 8. Do not gloat over me, my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will rise. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. Do not gloat over me. That's what the Assyrians were doing. They were gloating. If you go to the British Museum in London, you can see a whole room full of Assyrian gloating. This is them, some of the pictures, some of the art that the Assyrians produced at the time, some of it showing their conquest over another small town very close to Jerusalem, Lachish. They conquered that, they've conquered Israel, and they love to show off about it and gloat about their success. And the city of Jerusalem replies, yes, I have fallen, but I will rise. Yes, I'm defeated, but I will have victory. Yes, you have me surrounded. It's like sort of sitting in a dark prison cell. But the Lord will be my light. The Lord God will be like somebody coming into that prison cell and lifting me up and bringing me out of the darkness and into the light, out of captivity and into freedom. The harm they're suffering, the pain they're enduring in Jerusalem, well, Jerusalem, the city, says, well, this is what we deserve. Why has all this happened to us? Verse 9, because I, Jerusalem, have sinned against him, against God. I will bear the Lord's wrath. Until he pleads my case and upholds my cause, he will bring me out into the light. I will see his righteousness. Micah has had a lot to say about the sins of Jerusalem. If you've been with us in previous Sundays, you'll have heard about their deceit and their violence and their abuse of the poor. And God can't just ignore that when that is happening. Yes, he is loving and forgiving, but he's also just and fair. He can't be seen to be rewarding evil and endorsing it and leaving it unpunished. So for a time, the city of Jerusalem suffered God's anger and wrath, but that wasn't his long-term plan. He wanted to forgive. God is a loving and forgiving God. The aim is that the sentence will be served and that the penalty for the crime will be paid, so that God can once again switch from being the prosecution lawyer to the defense lawyer, that he can plead their case, that he can acquit them or justify them. Instead of being condemned by God, the punishment is dealt with and they're set free. And once that day comes, the enemies of Jerusalem, the Assyrians and others, will see that happening. That's what verse 10 is saying. Then Jerusalem says, my enemy, the Assyrians, will see it and will be covered with shame. She who said to me, where is the Lord your God? My eyes will see her downfall. Even now she will be trampled underfoot like mire in the streets. Where is God when you can't see him? Well, part of the answer is that he's dealing with sin. And what this is telling us for today is that God's anger against sin is real and does need dealing with. Yes, he's loving and forgiving and merciful and wants to welcome people to him, but it won't just be because he's indifferent and doesn't care about the sin and the disobedience and the evil in our lives and in our hearts. It will be because it's been dealt with. And in the meantime, we feel a little bit trapped. It's like being in a dark prison cell, waiting to be brought out into the light. I guess we all know what that feels like, especially over the last 18 months. It's been a difficult time, a claustrophobic experience. A friend said to me that he found the first lockdown was a kind of novelty. It was a chance to try out new hobbies and live life in a different way and learn some new technology, and it was all quite interesting. The second lockdown in November, he just was banging on the door saying, let me out, so to speak. And then the third lockdown in January to the spring or whenever it was, he just said, well, it was just as if I'd given up banging on the door and resigned myself that no one was going to come and let me out. I wonder if you know what that feels like. The Bible is saying that is the human condition. That is our souls. That is our hearts. Locked into doing what is wrong and not being able to escape and do what is right. Locked into the reality of sickness and death that hangs over us and leaves a sense of dread over our lives, unable to escape from it. But the wonderful good news of Christianity is, as it says in Micah, that the Lord's wrath, the Lord's anger, has been carried. This is what Christianity is about Jesus becoming one of us, dying on the cross for us, to satisfy that anger of God, so that the wrath we deserve is carried away from us and dealt with. And we can say, well, the penalty is paid now. The sentence is served now. The things that I deserve have already happened, but they happened to Jesus and not to me. And when that realization hits you, and when that thought wins you over, well, Charles Wesley wrote a hymn about it to say what that is like, called And Can It Be? And he spoke about souls being in prison, like in a dark dungeon, and he said the dungeon flamed with light as God came in to set me free. My chains fell off. My heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. Is that your experience? Are you able to say what Micah said? Are you able to say, I have sinned against him? Are you able to be honest about that? And then to know the freedom and the joy that sin is punished, the penalty is paid, it's dealt with. You're out of that darkness. You're no longer in dread of death. You're set free from all of that. My chains fell off, my heart was free. I rose, went forth, and followed thee. Where is God when we don't see him? Well, he's dealing with sin. But then secondly, he's drawing in many. It's not yet time for God to show himself and put things right in an obvious public way, because he needs time to bring people into his community, into his family, into his city. And he wants people to join with him from all over the world. So verses 8 to 10, the city of Jerusalem speaking to the enemy. Now we get to verse 11, and now we've got God speaking to the city of Jerusalem. So God says to Jerusalem, the day for building your walls will come, the day for extending your boundaries. Look, okay, right now, Jerusalem, 701 BC, surrounded by enemy armies, locked in, you can't go anywhere, trapped and restricted. But the time will come, says God, when Jerusalem will be expanded, and you'll need a big building project to make it bigger and bigger and bigger, to fit in more and more people. Verse 12, in that day, people will come to you from Assyria and the cities of Egypt, even from Egypt to the Euphrates, from sea to sea, and from mountain to mountain. The earth will become desolate because of its inhabitants as the result of their deeds. In other words, Micah is talking about the whole world map of his day. This is what a world map would have looked like in Jerusalem in 701 BC. Perhaps not quite so much clarity that we've got there from the satellite picture, but something roughly like that. They would have been aware of sea at one side and sea at the other side, mountains at the top, mountains at the bottom, the big, powerful nations, Egypt on the left there, Assyria on the top right. The river Euphrates, you can see, runs right across from the top left down to the bottom right there, Israel, sort of in the middle left. And Micah is saying, look, people will be flocking to be part of this, to be part of God's city and God's people. They'll come from as far as Egypt and Assyria and the sea to the sea and the mountains to the mountains and the river Euphrates. From all over the world, people will come. And Micah was right about that. When Jesus arrived in the New Testament, he made it clear that Jerusalem was bigger than that particular place on the map. And that Jerusalem was a heavenly thing and an international community. And that the city is really waiting in heaven, waiting to come down to this world at the end. So Hebrews 12 says that we come to the New Jerusalem when we come to Jesus and join his church. Revelation 21 and 22 talk about that new community coming, becoming really what the whole world is about at the end of history. And again, it's described as a new Jerusalem. And Micah was right. If you look at a world map today, this one is from 2020, and look at the Christian population around the world, you'll see people coming to know Jesus from all over the world in huge numbers. Not physically traveling to the city of Jerusalem, that's not what it's about. It's about coming to Jesus, being part of his eternal community in this world and the next, part of his church in this world, part of his eternal church in the next life. What a wonderful thing to be part of. To have joined something multicultural and international. To meet in heaven with people from all over the world and from all down history. And to know, yes, there are many people who don't believe. But every year, every month, all around the world, there are new people joining that city and becoming part of it. That's what God is doing. He's not been sitting on his hands doing nothing. He's been drawing people in. Where is God when we don't see him? Well, he's dealing with sin. He's drawing many in. And then thirdly, Micah's third prophecy, he's shown he can save. So we're not being asked to have blind faith in a God that we can't see doing anything, because we have seen what he has done in our world. And so we know what he's able to do. And Micah prays in this last section. He says to God, come and save Jerusalem as you did once before. Be like a shepherd leading a flock of sheep to a safe and pleasant pasture. That's verse 14. Micah says to God, shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance, which lives by itself in a forest, in fertile pasture lands. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead, as in days long ago. Now, I don't know what paradise would look like if you were a flock of sheep. I've never been a sheep. I have no idea what they get excited about or what looks wonderful to them. But Micah is trying to describe that. He's saying in verse 14, he's saying, imagine a flock of sheep, and they're safe. They're living by themselves, far away from any danger or hazard. They've got it all to themselves. And they're living in a fertile land. Sheep love to eat things that grow. Well, this is a fertile place where lots grow. So much that there's even a forest there because everything grows there and there's plenty for them to enjoy. And just notice the end of verse 14, as in days long ago. Micah is saying, God, do this for us as you did a long time ago. He's thinking back to the big story of the Old Testament, the rescue story from Egypt. And the Lord replies to that prayer and says, yes, I will. Verse 15. As in the days when you came out of Egypt, I will show them my wonders. God did incredible things to save them, powerful things. They knew that had happened before. That was history, that was fact. And so they can pray and appeal to God, even when it's looking really bad for Jerusalem, they can pray and appeal to God. We've seen you do it now, do it for us again. And God says, yes, I will. And at that point, when God does that, it will be visible and it will be public. That's verse 16. Nations will see and be ashamed. Deprived of all their power, they will put their hands over their mouths and their ears will become deaf. They lick dust like a snake, like creatures that crawl on the ground. They will come trembling out of their dens. They will turn in fear to the Lord our God. The enemies of God, their power taken, they're shutting up. They're stopped. They're not mocking anymore. They're defeated. Evil is defeated like the snake in the Garden of Eden. That symbol of evil in the Old Testament. Evil now defeated and afraid and conquered visibly. Now this is a prayer that is answered by Jesus. We heard that in our first Bible reading. Micah prayed, come and shepherd your people, lead them to paradise. And Jesus came and said, I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. God does great wonders to save his people. Not only does he lay his life down, but he picks it up again. Not only does he die on a cross, but he's raised from the dead in such a public, visible way, seen by lots of people, recorded by lots of people. Those eyewitness accounts kept and circulated around the world for thousands of years in our Bibles. We know what God can do because we've seen what he has done. We don't necessarily need to see God in constant victory and power now. He has other things that he's doing, dealing with our sin, drawing people to himself. But that doesn't mean we have blind faith, because we know what God has done. He's shown us that. If you've never really looked into it, if you've never weighed up for yourself whether it might be true, please do look at the Bible and look at Christianity in that way. And weigh it up historically. Could any of this be real? Has God shown us that he's there? Has God shown us what he can do? In early 1945, there was something called the Battle of the Bulge. People living in Belgium and Luxembourg saw Nazi Germany come and reconquer where they lived. And they might have said, well, look at how things are. It's, the Nazis have control of our country, so we'd really better swap sides and we better join them because they're clearly the winners in this. But that would have been a foolish thing to do because the Allies had already arrived in Europe. D-Day had already happened. There were already huge American and British and French and other armies sweeping across Europe. It was already obvious that the Nazis were going to be defeated, and they were later that year. So it might be tempting in the moment to look at the situation and say, well, am I on the right side here? God appears to be not doing very much. I don't see him. But we need to remember that he has shown what he can do and what he will do. So Clara is making a great step today. On her behalf, we're introducing her and beginning her on a journey that leads to a great destination. And when she's old enough to begin asking those questions, where is God? We can tell her, well, you can't see him now, but there's lots of things that he's doing. He's dealing with sin. That's what we all need. Though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. He will bring me out into the light. He's dealing with sin. He's drawing many in. Will we look around and see that happening in our generation? More people, maybe just one or two here or there, but the number of believers from all around the world has only grown and never declined. Some have been promoted and gone to heaven. They're still part of Jerusalem. They're still part of that community. And more are joining all the time. And he's shown us what he can do and what he will do. Jesus has risen from the dead, visibly, publicly, and we'll see him in the end. So she's making a good step, and it's a good step that we can all be confident in.